GFI LanGuard is a tool that lets you centralize all the patch management, vulnerability assessment, and network auditing activities in a single, central management console. This means that there's no need to check on individual machines which patches are installed and which ones are missing. GFI LanGuard also offers the ability to generate detailed reports that you can hand over to an auditor when you need to prove compliance with different regulations, like PCI DSS, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, and many others. When it comes to patch management, you're going to be able to scan devices running different operating systems, like Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. You're also going to be able to scan and deploy patches not only to fix the operating system, but also applications like Microsoft Office and third-party applications from Adobe, Apple, Google, and several others. You can find the full list of supported applications on our website. As for vulnerability checks and vulnerability assessments, LanGuard can target Windows, Linux, and Mac OS systems across all environments, including virtual machines. LanGuard can also query for vulnerabilities present in network switches, firewalls, and other network devices. Again, the full list of supported devices is available on our website. The vulnerability scans are based on published standard definitions, databases like OVAL and SANS Top 20. Today, LanGuard's ever-growing database now contains over 70,000 different vulnerability checks. GFI LanGuard is a perfect choice to complement unified threat management systems that you may already have. These are usually firewalls that are designed to intercept threats at the perimeter level. They are able to identify and remove threats as they are traveling through the network, trying to get to your systems. And while they work well, they're not perfect, so some of these threats are still going to make it through and potentially infect your systems. Here is where GFI LanGuard can add an extra layer of security by performing scans and identifying known vulnerabilities and problems. This is why GFI LanGuard works best when combined with a UTM solution, like our own Carrier Control product, for example. GFI LanGuard can target network devices, desktop computers, servers, and mobile devices as well. This is what the LanGuard console looks like. What you see here, on the left-hand side, is the groups of devices that this instance of the LanGuard server is managing. When you run LanGuard on a machine that is part of a Windows domain, like in this demo, LanGuard automatically discovers and configures all the other devices that are part of the same domain. Even if you have devices on a different Windows domain, LanGuard is going to identify them eventually by using different techniques, like Active Directory servers, network pings, or SNMP. So eventually, any device that is connected to the system is going to show up in one of these groups. Even if it's not able to identify what that device is, LanGuard will add it to other computers as unidentified. These could be Unix systems, for example. From there, you can move it to any other group. You can also do this manually. You just need to right-click on any of the groups and you'll be able to add more devices. Select Add Computers from the network, and LanGuard is going to scan the network and identify any other Windows domains you may have. You can also specify a device via a text file. Just create a list of all the IP addresses or host names that you want to add. Or you can just also type in devices one by one via their IP address or hosting. Once you add a device, you're going to have it in the menu. One last thing about this screen is that, as you can see, these devices are grouped depending on the Active Directory or work group that they belong to. This is LanGuard's default grouping, but you can change it by clicking on a group and selecting other options for grouping devices. Grouping devices is extremely important, especially when you have hundreds or even thousands of them, and you want to configure whole groups instead of going one by one, which might take a long time. When you add machines or edit their properties later on, you can specify custom attributes that you want to use for grouping. These attributes can be anything you can think of, like department, location, the subnet, anything that might be useful to you for grouping. So, when you add devices, you specify the correct attribute, and then you're going to be able to use those attributes to group your devices in different ways. Once you have grouped the devices in the way you wanted, the next step is to gather system information from all the different panels you see at the center of the dashboard. You can do this by running a scan on the system. Doing it manually is not the preferred way, but it is the simplest to explain. You click on the scan section, and then you need to specify a target. That can be a single device or a group of devices. If you want a single target, you can select the IP address. For specifying a group, you can click on the button next to the target field. The second step is to specify the type of scan that you want to run, which you can select from the drop-down menu. There are many pre-configured options, called scanning profiles here. These serve as configuration templates that specify exactly what the scan is going to do and are also customizable. You can also create and add new ones, and they are going to show up in this list, like the one on the bottom. Once you specify the type of scan that you want to run, you're ready. The final step is to specify what credentials LanGuard is going to use. If you are running this within a Windows domain, then LanGuard is likely going to run it using an administrator account of the domain, which normally has enough privileges to connect to all the systems. In that case, we could just use the currently logged on user, and that would be sufficient for LanGuard. But if you have devices that are not part of the Windows domain, then you may need to specify alternative credentials. For that, you can enter an account here that you want to use, and you are ready. Just click on the Scan button, and LanGuard is going to start scanning the systems, gathering all the information to fill the panels in the dashboard. The type of information, depending on the type of scanning profile that you use, is going to show up in different areas. You can browse through it and take a look at, for example, all the vulnerabilities discovered if you ran a vulnerability assessment type of a scan. Notice that whatever I'm selecting on the left-hand side in the group of devices, that is what I'm going to get the information for. If I just want to look at the vulnerabilities in this case, for this particular machine, I just select it on the left-hand side, and I'm only looking at the vulnerabilities affecting that system. Or I can take a look at the entire domain and see all the vulnerabilities discovered there. These vulnerabilities listed here are usually going to involve a patch to correct them. But in other cases, there is no patch associated, no update that can correct the problem. The first one here, for example, auto run is enabled, may be something that you actually need, and so it is not a vulnerability. In that case, if you don't want this to affect the statistics when it comes to vulnerability levels, you can always use the links here on the bottom right-hand side to either acknowledge, which is going to ignore that vulnerability for the current scan, or you can just ignore it completely, and it is never going to get added until you remove that row. But other vulnerabilities like this one here, missing security updates, do involve a patch to be able to correct them. And in that case, this link on the bottom right, Remediate, is going to become active. As you can see here on the vulnerability list, if you click on any of them, you are going to be able to see the description at the bottom. You can also see links to the different organizations that have reported this vulnerability. And if you click on any of these links, you are going to go to their website and will be able to see more information about what that vulnerability actually is and what is the recommended procedure to correct it. If you click on the Patches button here, you will see the different patches that are affecting whatever you have selected on the left-hand side. In this case, I still have the entire domain selected, but if I want to look at the patches that are missing on this particular device here, then I select that, and now I'm only looking at the updates that are missing on that device. This happens to be a CentOS Linux server, so all these rows are RPM packages that need to be deployed there. If I look at the Windows devices, then I will see the Windows patches that are required. When you click on Ports, you will see information about what TCP and UDP ports are open in your systems if you ran a scan that included network auditing. The interesting thing about this network scan is that LanGuard can tell you more than just if the port is open or not. If you look at this particular device, its name implies that it is running a mail server. So I do expect to see port 25, which is an SNTP port, open. And it is open, but it's also telling me what is running behind it. In this case, it is a Cario Connect mail server, and the version of the software is also there. This is because LanGuard is actually opening a TCP socket connection to that port, and is getting the welcome message from that server. If you ran a scan using a profile that includes software auditing, then LanGuard is going to be able to gather an inventory of all the software and applications that are installed on the machines. In this case, I've selected this CentOS Linux server, so all I see here are RPM packages that are installed. But if I select a Windows device, it shows all the installed software that I would see in the control panel's program removal window. The difference is that from here, you can see all the applications of all the devices in the domain. Under hardware, if you used a scanning profile that was able to perform a hardware scan, then LanGuard is going to gather information about the different hardware installed on all those systems. You can see things here like network devices, processors, memory, and many more. In my case, all the devices you see are running the same hardware, but if you have separate physical devices, you're going to be able to tell the difference. LanGuard is also able to gather information about network shares on Windows system. It is very common that people share folders and then they forget about them. Those shares remain open and can become a security problem. LanGuard lets you scan the network and identify everything that is shared so you can decide to keep them open or close them. You can also see services running on the systems you have selected on the left-hand side. You can see the processes that are running, user accounts created, which accounts are currently active, or what sessions are running. Once you run a scan, assuming it was a full vulnerability and patch type of scan, then LanGuard is going to gather all the information, store it in its database, and visualize it here in this dashboard. We have already talked about how you can run a scan manually. Here is how a previous scan looks like. Scans can take a long time to run. In this case, where I scanned the entire domain containing multiple devices, it took about an hour or so. The collected information also automatically becomes available on the main dashboard. So this is how you run a scan manually. It's not the preferred way because manual scans can take a long time, and maybe you would prefer to do this at night or during a weekend and run it unattended. We will come back to this a bit later. Now let's talk about remediation. Once you decide to deploy patches and software updates, you can also do it manually. You come to the Remediate section, select the targets on the left-hand side, and then open this section here, Deploy Software Updates. LanGuard is going to list all the available software updates for the selected device. If you don't want to deploy everything, only a specific update you need, you just select that one and click Remediate. You can start it immediately, but you can also schedule it. You can customize credentials here and select what to do before and after deploying the patches. Many of these patches are going to require a system reboot. Rebooting a machine that is running a production service, like a web server, or a system that is being used by a user might not be a good idea. In that case, you may want to schedule it for later. Another thing you can do within the remediation section is, if you've deployed patches and some of those are causing problems, you can roll them back. Here's the section where you can do that. As with the previous section, you can select the whole list or just specific software you want to roll back. The configuration window also works the same. You can deploy entire applications from scratch from the remediation section. Let's say you may need to deploy the Chrome internet browser on all Windows devices your users have. All you need to do is just point LanGuard toward the installer for that application, which may be an executable or an MSI or a script, for example. Specify the parameters that may be needed to run it, then click Deploy, and that's it. As with the scans, manual remediation is not the preferred way. It's better to schedule it. To do that, you go to Configuration, then Scheduled Scans. Right-click anywhere on the screen, and then you can schedule a new scan from that window. Just like with the manual scans, you need to define target devices, either by manual selection, letting LanGuard browse through the network and discover devices automatically, or by feeding a text file to it. In the second step, you can optionally choose to scan the machine where the GFI LanGuard server is running. Then you can set the timing where you'll specify when you want the scheduled scan to run. It can be a one-time only or a repetitive task that happens on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. Then, just like before with the manual scans, you configure the scanning profile you would like to use. In the next step, you can configure alternative credentials. If you want to scan devices that are not part of the domain LanGuard belongs to, then you may need to specify separate accounts. You can set power savings, which means what to do when the target device or devices are not on. If the devices support the Wake on LAN feature, then LanGuard is going to wake them up. The next window is probably the most important. As mentioned before, LanGuard can run scans to gather information. But if you want LanGuard to actually deploy patches within a scheduled scan, you need to enable this option here so LanGuard is going to scan the network, discover what patches are missing, and then based on the list of pre-approved patches that you provided in advance, deploys them. If there are applications that you may not want your users to have, based on the software inventory that LanGuard creates, you can go through them and mark them as unauthorized. Once you do that, LanGuard can also automatically remove them. Then, finally, if you would like to receive a report right after LanGuard finishes the scan, you can optionally enable this here. You will need to configure an email account that LanGuard can use to send you an email with the results attached as a PDF document. Of course, if you want to recreate a report, you can just go to the Report section and select the scan you need the report for. After this, you are ready to save this as a new scheduled scan. You click on Finish and it is going to show up on this list. You can have multiple scheduled scans run at the same time, targeting different groups of devices. There's no limit to how many you can have, just add them to the list. We have already talked about scanning profiles, the configurable templates you can use, edit, and create. If you go to Configuration and then Scanning Profiles and click on any of these options here, you are going to be able to see the current ones, and if you click on Edit, it is going to open the editor. In the editor, you select the Vulnerabilities tab, and you will see all the vulnerability definitions that are in the repository of the current server. You can select them all, but if you would like to create a scanning profile that targets only a few of these, you can type in the unique ID of the vulnerabilities in the bottom and select only those. In addition to that, you can also use different parameters to sort the list, like product, OS, release date, or timestamp. So that's how you configure a custom scan that is going to meet your exact needs. If you use the scanning profiles that are predefined, in many cases, they may perform tasks that are unnecessary because you don't even have those types of systems in your network. Same thing with patches. If you click on Patches, you can customize this list as well. Everything is selected by default, but you can search for specific patches and select the ones you need. You can use the filters here as well. Once you've selected what you need, you can save it. Other things that you can customize in the scanning profile are, for example, timeouts, how long LanGuard is going to wait for a reply when it is trying to connect to a remote system. If you want to run a scan that is very fast, then it would make sense to make those timeouts short. It might skip some devices, but that is the trade-off of running fast scans. Here, you can also specify a scan targeting multiple devices simultaneously. You can select the number of threads for the scan as well. Keep in mind that the more threads you are running, the more resources will be required on the LanGuard server. Going back to the admin console, another thing that is especially relevant here is the patch auto deployment, where you provide your approval for automatic software deployment. That is, when you run a scheduled scan with the remediation enabled. In those cases, it is very important to pre-approve any patches you want to deploy. And here's where you can do that. You can go through the list of software, and once you find the ones you are looking for, just click here to approve or disapprove. In some cases, you may need to disapprove because even though the software is in your repository, you may not want to deploy that particular version of the software. But for the most part, you want to approve anything that you are going to be using. You can also use the automatic approval here, where you can give your approval based on the categories. If it is a software update that classifies as critical, important, or moderate, then you can pre-approve based on that classification. Any software that meets that criteria will be automatically approved. This is one place where you can configure approvals, but keep in mind that you also have the control within the scanning profile. And anytime you run a scan where you want to remediate things, you need to specify the scanning profile to use. And as long as that is configured properly to deploy the software you want, it is going to do it. Now, about the LanGuard software repository that I mentioned. The LanGuard server is constantly downloading all new software updates, everything that gets published, on a daily basis. It does that when it comes to Windows patches and updates by connecting to our GFI backend servers, looking for anything that is new there to download, and incorporates that in the local repository. You can control and configure the repository when you go to Software Updates and then Patch Auto Download. You can click on this link here, and on the Patch Repository tab, you can change the download folder if you need to. And if you use Windows Updates, WSUS, you can also use that repository in combination with LanGuard's. It's totally optional. LanGuard is able to work without it. If you don't want to keep all the patches in your repository, you can also specify which ones should LanGuard remove based on how long they haven't been used. This will help you manage the size of your repository. Another thing you can configure is the time frame that LanGuard is going to use to download these patches from the GFI backend servers. This is a good thing to have because typically, all these software updates come packaged within archives that are compressed, but still very large. So you do want to have some control over when the download is happening. You might want it to happen late at night or maybe on specific dates so it won't affect your normal operations. Here on the General tab, you only have two options: to download all patches or only the patches that are needed. If you select the latter, then based on the information that LanGuard has gathered about the systems you have, which requires a scan in advance of course, then it is going to download only those patches that are needed for those systems. This also helps in minimizing the repository size. But if you prefer, you can download all patches. You can click Configure and then go through the list of software and just check the ones you need. One final thing since we're here under Configuration is to mention that LanGuard uses a database. The only database that is supported is Microsoft SQL Server. LanGuard can also use Microsoft SQL Express for smaller deployments below 500 nodes. The database and the SQL Server don't have to be on the same machine where GFI LanGuard runs. You can have them on separate machines. Just point LanGuard toward the machine where they are located. You're going to be able to do that during the initial configuration of the software. If later on you need to change the database configuration, you can come to this screen, and from here, you can change the machine name or IP address, the name of the SQL, and provide the account to access that. There's another thing that you can do here when you go through the list of scanned computers. When you have a license that is limited to just some number of nodes, you might find that LanGuard has automatically added devices that you don't want to manage. In that case, you can always go through this list and remove devices. Now, let's take a look at the final step, reports. Many reports are classified as general reports, and then you have the compliance type of reports underneath. You can customize any of these reports to some extent. Let's open Last Scan Details. These are the items that you can change when it comes to customization. You can check or uncheck these boxes here depending on what you need, and then you can save this report with a different name. You also have some filtering options. In this case, it is the last scan, but if you want to create a report not just for the last one, but any other you may have done in the past, then you can click on this button and go through the list to select the one you want. Same thing here. You can click on Save and save it with a new name. Once you are ready, you can just click on the Generate Report button. When you generate reports, as with the dashboard, what you select on the left-hand side is going to be the target. In this case, though, since I selected to create a report based on a previous scan, the number of devices is automatically generated. As you can see here on the top, this report involves all the devices in the domain, 9 computers in this case. All these reports will start with the summary page, and then they go into more details. So, at the bottom, you are going to see information about the individual devices. There's also an index here that you can use to quickly go to specific sections in the report. These are the general purpose reports, but if you want to generate a compliance type of report, then you can also create those from here. Let's say you may want to generate one for PCI DSS. You have all these reports to choose from. Let's say we want the network patching status, so we click on that. Same thing here. I can select what items to report on, and filters are also available. Here is the report, and just like the previous, it starts with an introduction. Since this is the network patching status, it is going to give you status information for all the devices you selected. If you need to save or email this report, assuming you have already configured an email account to use, this is where you can do it. These are the available formats. PDF is the default, but you can select anything else from this list. You can also save the report locally. Reports can be scheduled as well. You can create a scheduled report from here, and as I have shown you before, you can always go back to a previous one in the database. This admin console that I have shown you so far is the LanGuard Server Console. This is for the standalone Windows application only. But if you want to centralize the dashboard view and also the reports, you can deploy the Central Management Server. This is what the Central Management Console looks like. As you can see, this dashboard view is pretty much the same that you have in the LanGuard console. The same buttons are here: vulnerabilities, patches, ports, software, hardware, and system information. The difference is that from here, you will be able to see systems across multiple instances of LanGuard, and not just a single LanGuard server. This aggregation feature also applies to reports generated from here, so deploying a central management server is really beneficial when you have multiple instances of LanGuard running within your organization. And with this, I conclude my presentation. We have covered the most important features of GFI LanGuard. If you want to give it a test run, a free, fully functional 30-day trial is available on our website. Or if you have any questions, you can always reach us through our partners and sales representatives. Thank you for watching.